Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? Awesome, okay, so I'm gonna get started now. So today we're gonna be talking about theme design for developers. It's just gonna be like a brief intro to some design principles that are gonna help you as you're making your themes. I'm Mel Choice. I'm a WordPress core designer, and in my spare time, I like to design free themes. And these are a couple of the themes that I've designed before. So today we'll be talking about just some basic design principles you can apply to your WordPress themes. There are going to be three main topics we're going to cover today. So first is going to be finding a concept for your theme. The second one's going to be visual design, which I think is probably what most of you are here for. And then the last one is going to be theme user experience design. And we'll be doing a Q&A right after this in the theme review Slack channel in the WordPress Slack team. So the first thing we're going to cover is concepts. So when you're making your themes, you should always start with some sort of basic concept. And one thing I like to say is that you shouldn't design for everyone. I think there's very few instances in which a theme could work for everyone. And usually in those cases, it's when you have a team that's like, really big and able to like take on the challenge. But if it's like you or just like you and a couple of other people, it's really better to focus in on some sort of topic. So this topic could actually be as specific or as broad as you want. For example, a very specific theme topic could be like a food blogging theme targeting smartphone photographers, which would be different, than people who take professional photos with, really good cameras. And then like a really broad topic would just be like a modern business theme. So each of these has a different kind of set of constraints, and some are more stringent than others. And I really think that you should embrace constraints because by embracing them, you're going to be able to build stronger themes. By like taking the constraints that you're giving yourself and running with them, like you're really able to hone in on a specific concept. And so once you once you have a basic concept in mind, you can start designing for specific scenarios. So just think through what scenarios and what people would be doing in your themes. So like what kind of use cases will there be for your themes? So if we're thinking about like a modern business theme, what does an average business website need? Okay, so you probably need like a physical location listed somewhere if you have a store. If you don't, you probably don't need that, but you'll probably still need some sort of contact information, whether that's a phone number or a contact form or even just an email address listed somewhere. You'll probably need strong page templates, and you might actually not need a super strong blog because if you're doing like a business website or even a small business website, there's not a ton of chance that you're going to be doing a lot of blogging just because most businesses don't really have the resources. Now, it looks like my themes aren't, or my slides aren't presenting. One second. Oh, awesome. You're not able to see my slides changing. Okay, let's, let me investigate. Can you see them now? Okay, Cool. So it sounds like you just saw a change. Awesome. Okay, so the previous slides were all really text-based. So as long as you like heard what I was saying, you know, you're pretty good to go. And I'll post up my slides afterwards, so you can see it with the video. Is everyone good to go forward, do you think? Seeing a bunch of people typing. I think I'm also a couple seconds ahead. Cool. Okay, so I'm gonna start back up. Sorry about that. Cool. So designing for scenarios. So back to thinking about like a modern business website. So I was just saying that you're probably going to want some strong page templates, but blogging templates might not be as important there. So you're also probably going to need a navigation bar that can support up to probably like a dozen or more pages at various different levels. And if you're designing like a theme for a shop, then they might need a way to display their products. And with this kind of website, the type that you're going to choose is probably going to be stronger, more serious, and more businessy. Meanwhile, if you think about, let's think about like a food blogging theme for smartphone photographers. Since they don't really have a really nice camera, you're probably going to want to stay with somebody, or like stay away from doing like really big, luscious photos, just because the photos probably aren't going to be the best quality. I mean, some people are able to take really amazing smartphone photography, but I think the vast majority of people, your photos are going to be a little grainy. They're not going to be necessarily super well lit. So instead of emphasizing photography, emphasize typography. If you're doing photo blogging, you're usually going to do some sort of recipes along with it. So it's really important to have like an easy way to add recipes, for them to be like set in a really nice type. Maybe this even means building a recommended plugin that pairs with the theme just for like some sort of extra feature support. Maybe it just means, really nice post styling. A variety of page templates probably aren't super important in this case, but nicely styled category archive templates might be. So, type can have a little more personality than you would with like a modern business theme, but still readable. So this is the type of thing you want to start to think about when you're planning your theme. Like, think about these scenarios and like what would be most appropriate for each scenario. So now we're going to talk about visual design, which is, I'm sure, what most of you are here to hear about. The first topic is typography, which is probably the most important part of the vast majority of themes. So, what's a site without its content? The type needs to be clear, readable, and context appropriate. In an article written actually a bunch of years ago at this point, Oliver Reichenstein said, web design is 95% typography. And I think this actually still mostly applies today. I think that especially when you're working in WordPress, which is very focused around words, typography is super integral. Picking typefaces, though, is super hard, especially if you're really new to design. It's hard to know, like, oh, like what should I pair, with each other? What kind of fonts should I pick? So here's just a couple tips that I have. The first of which is the Google Web Fonts popular filter, which is actually pretty good. There's a lot of really good things there, and the ones that are popular tend to be the ones that are better. So it's not a bad place to go and just be like, oh, I like this. So the next tip is to use font families. And so what a font family is when you have a font that's like, let's say there's Noto Sans and then there's Noto Serif. So it's two different varieties of the same font that look really, really great together. So if you do want to use like a sans serif and a serif, or like a slab and a sans, start looking for families to use, just because they're built to have similar features and they kind of naturally pair well together. Another thing to look for is a font with multiple weights. So what I mean here is that most standard fonts come with regular bold and then regular italic, bold, italic, which is really cool. Unfortunately, there's a lot of web fonts out there that don't actually have either bold or italic. So you absolutely always want to choose, especially a body font that has at least regular, italic, bold, and bold italic. But even better is finding a font face that actually has multiple weights outside of that, like a heavy or a light or a thin, just because that gives you more variety with the typography that you can do. And sometimes it's really nice to pair like a light weight of a font with like a dark, like a heavier weight of a font, instead of doing like, you know, a sans serif for your header and serif for your body. So like even just within the same font, if it has a lot of weights, can give you a lot of different variety. And so the last tip I have is to steal font combinations. So if you see a font or if you see a website or a theme that has really good fonts, just, you know, look and see what they're using and then try to use it yourself. It's actually a tip that I give to most people for most things. If you're unsure, just like look and see what other people do. So the next thing I want to talk about is size. It's super important to make sure that in your themes, your font is large enough. So it looks like my slides aren't moving forward again. Sorry about that. I wonder if there's a specific, you know what, I'm just gonna go through like this, because you can see this, right? That's too big. Can you see going forward like this okay? You know, it might be that it might be that the slideshow is actually a different setting. Okay, you know, I'll go forward like this and hopefully you'll be able to see it changing. So anyway, my next rule of thumb for size is just make sure your text is large enough. And for most themes, this means just 14 pixels or higher for your body font. I would never go for like lower than 14 pixels generally. It's just like as a rule of thumb. And if it looks too small, you know, don't ever be afraid to go even bigger. 16 pixels is beautiful on a lot of fonts for body. Even 18 pixels can be great. And if you're doing a blogging theme, like if your theme is a little more minimalist, you can totally get away with even going higher than that. So the big thing here is just don't make people squint. It's okay if you're doing smaller font sizes for like things like, I don't know, categories or tags or, you know, meta information isn't as important as your main content. But when it is your main content, just, you know, stick to like 14 pixels minimum. And then a second thing that's super important, and also I'd say one of the biggest issues I see with type in themes is just an overall lack of line height. So line height is the space between each line of text. And as a general rule of thumb, my headers are always 1.2 to 1.4 times this, or actually, you know, 1.3 times the size of your font. And the body text for me is always 1.4 to 1.6 times the size of my font. And the cool thing about line height is you could actually just give it 1.2. That's it. Like you don't need to like actually calculate what that is in pixel size. You can just use the like the 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, whatever, which is just like a pretty cool tip. That way, you know, you could always just plug in the same kind of thing. And if it looks too tight with whatever font you're using, just like bump it up a little bit. If it looks too broad, you know, bump it down a little bit. But it's just like a good rule of thumb. And then the last thing I'd suggest with type is your line length. So as a general rule, paragraphs shouldn't be more than 50 to 75 characters long. This is like the most optimal amount of characters per line that makes something like really readable and nice. So when you are doing your text, just make sure to keep it within that kind of width. So the next topic that I'm going to cover is color. And color has meaning. So there's a lot of psychology around color, and you know it's pretty complicated, and different cultures have different meanings for colors. So I would just say when you're planning your theme, just learn a little bit more about like color psychology, color theory, before you figure out what colors you want to use. That way, if you're trying to target a specific niche, like healthcare, you know, you might want to go with blue, which is a little more caring. If you want to go with like some sort of luxury brand, you know, sites for people making products for rich people, then, you know, colors like purple and black and silver are like really nice and really regal. And always keep contrast in mind. So color even could affect whether or not people can use and read the themes that you're producing. So, you know, just keep it in mind when you're designing, because too high or too low contrast actually makes it hard for some people to read your text. Especially, you know, anyone with low vision or vision impairments, color blindness. That's something I'd also check, is just, you know, just make sure that the sites you're building can be visible. Also, just, you know, as a rule of thumb, don't use too many bright or bold colors. So they're really great for emphasis, drawing attention to specific parts of a page, but too many bright or bold colors can make your theme, you know, kind of hard to look at, or it can make it hard for people to find the most important content on the page. If you have a bunch of colors competing with each other, you can't tell which is the dominant color, you know, which one's more important than the other. So it just, you know, it makes it a lot harder for people to, you know, appropriately like categorize content within the page. So, you know, another rule of thumb I have is always to soften your blacks. So since pure black doesn't really exist in the world around us, it ends up looking really harsh and unnatural on the web. So whenever I want to use a dark color like a black, I end up adding just a little bit of color into it, or I go for like a dark gray, like a 222 or 111 instead of like 000. And so if you're using just like a general color picker, just go like up and to the right a little bit and like, you know, put a little bit of blue into it, a little bit of red into it, and it just makes it look a little bit more natural. So if you're really struggling with colors, here's 2 tips that I have. So dark text, not black, but dark, plus a light background, usually like a white or an off-white, plus 1 to 2 highlight colors is usually really great. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with using like light background and a couple accents and dark text. The other option is, you know, like with fonts, just steal color palettes from sites you like. You're like, oh man, the color on this site is really great. And like, it's this like super great business site. You know, maybe the business theme I'm building should use a similar color palette. So white space. If any of you work with clients regularly, sometimes you'll hear is like, oh, it has too much white space, get rid of the white space. I feel like it's always wrong. You really want to let everything breathe. Ample white space between elements actually like helps give your themes better hierarchy. You know, it just makes everything look much nicer, much more refined. It's something I see a lot with themes that don't have such great a design, is that everything is really cramped. So, you know, just give everything a little bit of padding, a little bit of margin, and, you know, you should be better. And, you know, finding the right balance of white space is hard. So when in doubt, just loosen things up a little bit. Not necessarily your text like this, because that actually looks pretty bad. But just the elements on your page, you know, put your title and your content, you know, a little bit farther away from your header, put your footer down a little bit more, put your sidebar off a little bit more, you know, just loosen things up. And then I'd say the last visual thing to really think about with themes is that less is more. So you should add your extra details deliberately. You know, think about whether or not they're really, really necessary. Are you doing it because you want to add decoration, or are you doing it because it actually contributes to the theme? So one example of this is just to use drop shadows really carefully. Just, you know, are you adding it because you want extra decoration, or because other people are doing it, or do you want to add it just because it adds a sense of depth to your theme, which is really helpful. That's one of the things I really love drop shadows for, is it separates whatever element you apply it to from the background. So it's really great if you want to like just make something a little more like 3D, or like bring it up a little bit, put it more in your line of sight. In general, just for drop shadows, since people use them so often, I would say never go darker than 25% opacity. After that, it just starts looking a little garish, a little unnatural, in fact. So, you know, usually I like to keep it, you know, probably actually at like 10 to 15% opacity. but you know, you could probably go up to 25 without it looking super bad. So, you know, the same kind of thing could be said for gradients, which are used pretty frequently. You know, less so now than you know, last year, the year before, but still enough that, like, you know, gradients have a specific use, you know, just to like give things 3D, like make things look a little 3D, give it a little more depth. And they're good to use for that kind of purpose. Just try to keep it subtle. Like, I see a lot of people using gradients that are super striking, when that's not really the best. It looks really fake that way. But just like a tiny bit of color separation on the top and bottom can look really beautiful. I'd say one of the most egregious things I see now, especially in premium themes, is the overuse of animation. Really use animation sparingly. I mean, like, really, really sparingly. Inappropriate animation can actually be super jarring and detract from your theme. If you have a homepage where like everything on the page moves, like, it just gets distracting. What are you supposed to look at in that case? Like, everything's moving from everywhere, and like, it actually like can make you feel sick and like dizzy to see that kind of animation everywhere. So when I think about using animation, I only use it to show change, not decoration. So, you know, if a state changes, if you press a button, if like you get a notification, or like, you know, things like this, it's good for showing change, but I would say not, you know, not much else. Just be really, really careful when you use animation. I'm just gonna check in on the chat really quickly to see if everything's going okay. Cool, looks like no issues. So I guess, you know, this mode of presenting is working a little bit better. So we're gonna move on a little bit to user experience. So I think this is probably one of the biggest problems I see in the theme repo. There's nothing worse than finding a theme that looks super, super awesome. It's like gorgeous and luscious, and it does exactly what you need it to, only to install and activate it and find like 1,000 options that you need to hand configure to get it set up like the demo. It's just like, there's nothing more crushing than that. Like, oh my God, I thought I found this great theme, but now I'm gonna have to spend, you know, the next day or two just like setting it up. And so the first thing I would say about that is, you know, decisions, not options. It's one of the key tenets we have in the WordPress project. Cut the number of options down to what's absolutely necessary. You know, don't make your users think. You shouldn't have to like read a full manual to be able to set up a theme. So for example, you know, maybe instead of letting people control, you know, every single color in your theme, you know, every heading color, every body text color, every widget background, etc., maybe let them choose like 2 or 3 different colors, and then from those colors you can generate a color scheme for them, using like a library like Tonesk or something, or like using like just different color functions. And that way, like, you present the ability to like for users to make some changes and like have some customization, but you're not putting the entire burden of the design on your users. I feel like this is like super important also because like theme users, I think actually people in general think that they want total control, but when they're presented with total control, it's just too much, it's overwhelming. So, you know, cut down on options. But if you do use options, you know, think about using smart defaults. So turn on the options that are going to be used the most by default. You know, make some informed assumptions about your users, about your customers. Do you think that they're, you know, the majority of them are going to want to display something as a list or in a grid? And if you think like most people want to go for a grid because that's what's hot right now, you know, set that on by default and then give them an option to change it later. So when you can, you know, present to them what you think they'll want the most first, and then if you want, let them change it. So this one I think is super important, especially now as the customizer is getting better. But if you're giving users an option to change something that they can actually see, you know, absolutely use the customizer for adding, you know, background images, header images, whatever. Those are like already pretty default in the customizer, but like things like colors, you know, work great in the customizer. So I recently used the Make theme by Theme Foundry, and I really liked it. and it had like a ridiculous amount of options. I think probably too many options. But the way they used the customizer was actually really lovely. I was able to see the changes I was making, which helped me, I think, design a better theme than if I had this like monster theme options panel on the back end and I just had to toggle back and forth between back and front. So, the customizer is probably one of the coolest tools we have now in WordPress. So take advantage of it as much as you can, but be sane, because decisions, not options. Don't go super crazy with options. Also, I would say if you can, ditch the theme option frameworks. They're really hard to use. They're really confusing. And like I said, the toggling back and forth is it's hard on users, especially users who have if you don't have a design background, it's hard to visualize what your change is going to do. So if you have the resources, I would also say user tests, especially if you're making any sort of premium theme. User testing can go a long way just to figure out what's working really well and what's not working super well for users setting up your themes. So a resource that I really like is usertesting.com. It's relatively cheap, easy. With user testing, I really wouldn't do more than 3 tests total. So just sit somebody down in front of your theme and go, hey, try to set it up like the demo. And so you can either use something like usertesting.com, or if you want to do it super cheap and on the fly, just pull in some friends or family members and just be like, hey, I have this site set up. Try to activate my theme and set it up, and let's see how you do. If you're super interested in the idea of user testing, I'd read Rocket Surgery Made Easy by Steve Krug. He's a usability expert, and it's probably one of the best books I've read about testing. It's super, super small and speedy, so you can finish it in 2 to 3 hours. So yeah, I would totally user test when you can. And that's it. Thanks for watching.